Welcome to tonight's discussion. Want to give some ground rules on what we're going to be doing tonight. This is the new structure that we're moving into, at least for the next little while. So first, I'm going to share a little bit of background on this text. Then we're going to have a time to think and then a time to share as a group. I'm going to gather our thoughts together, try to make some connections between what we might be hearing from God as a community, and then I'll give a short final message on some other takeaways from the text. So, one way to think about what's about to happen is that I'm the curator of an art museum and I'm showing you a piece. So, I happen to know some things about this art piece. I've chosen it for us to look at. But that doesn't mean that after I share some of those things, you who are going through the museum can't notice things that I haven't noticed before, or you might notice something that I haven't and nobody else has seen either. And so we want to have our understandings of this text shared with each other. And so I'm just setting some ground rules for that discussion or some background knowledge for that discussion as we move forward. So we are going to read the passage of Jesus and Peter walking on the water today. Some background for that is that in this passage, Jesus had just fed 5,000 people in the previous passage, or 5,000 men, which could mean up to 20,000 or so men, women, and children. And so that's a lot of people. He had been healing the people and teaching them before that happened. So it was a long day for Jesus. So at the end of the day in the evening, he sent the disciples away, told them to get in the boat, go across to the other side, and he sent the crowds away, saying, I need to be alone right now. So he had gone up to the mountains to pray. So we're going to see that in the text. And remember, one of the things that we are trying to really focus on now is revelation and response. So as we read through this passage, uh, keep in mind what you're seeing as revelation from God and how the characters are responding to it. So here's our text, Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was alone there, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So let's explore some things in this passage and try to make it a little bit more vivid. So, first things first, Jesus really wanted to be alone. He had sent the disciples ahead of him, he had sent the crowd home. He just wanted to pray. Jesus took time out of his day, every day, to spend time with the Father. And he needed that time, especially after a hard days of work. I'm going to show up on the screen now a painting that I think is pretty stereotypical of how this passage is often portrayed artistically. So this, if you were to just say, what do you think's, paint a picture for me of this passage, this is what I would paint for you, and I would be wrong. And here's why I think I'm wrong. And this, I looked up a bunch of paintings. Most of them really look like this. So this isn't just cherry picked. So first things first, Jesus wasn't white. It's not really the main point of this text, but I think that that's obvious and certainly worth noting today. Whenever we see realistic depictions of Jesus, he was not a white guy. He wouldn't pass for a white guy in our society. Second thing is, it's bright outside. The text tells us that it's just before dawn, so it would not be very bright. It would be quite dark. there are strong winds and heavy waves, not just the tiny ones we see in the painting. Look at the size of the waves compared to the boat. The waves, I guarantee, would have been much bigger for the disciples to have been working so hard against them. And finally, looking where Jesus is, the water is flat. This is just my speculation, but it says the wind doesn't die down until Jesus gets on the boat. So I don't think that the water was flat. I think that as Jesus was walking out to the boat, he was going up and down. He was surfing with just his feet to get out there, moving on hills that were the waves. So that was hard work for him. But that's this passage, as we see through this painting, wasn't anything like this. So the text says that the disciples' boat was out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. The actual translation is they were many stadia from the shore. So they were, let's say, at least a half a mile out. They could have been as many as 4 miles out to get to the middle of this Sea of Galilee. That's a long distance for Jesus to be walking from the shore up and down these waves, but he got out there. He wanted to go back, be with his disciples. He knew where they were. Then the text says that the disciples, when Jesus was approaching, they thought that he was a ghost. So this shows the difference between what actual Jewish theology was and what the common folk theology was. So in Judaism, there's no dualism. Your spirit's attached to your body. Once you're dead, you're not coming back. That's how it was. You went to go be with the place of the dead. But they're seeing this spirit on the water. This is not like the evil spirits they had cast out. This looked like a person. And so the folk theology was that ghost existed, and the disciples believed it when they saw Jesus approaching. And then from a distance, it was dark. They didn't know. So this difference is definitely worth pointing out. But Jesus sees this and he comforts them. He says, "Hey, don't be afraid. It's me." And the actual text says, instead of saying, "It is I," Jesus essentially says, "I am." And that reminds us of God's name as he reveals it to Moses at the burning bush in the book of Exodus, where he says, "I am Yahweh," which means I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. So this is definitely a callback, Jesus establishing his deity if walking on the water wasn't enough. But he's also walking on the water, which reminds us of another story involving the early Israelites, which was the crossing of the Red Sea. Imagine if instead of when the Israelites got to the Red Sea, they didn't wait for Moses to part it. Uh, they just walked on the top of it, and the Egyptians wouldn't have been able to follow them that way either. This way, but that was not how it worked. Instead, God separated the waters. So he's showing how much more, if this is how it used to be, now walking on the water instead of through it is a way to get over uh, this major body of water. So Peter then recognizes Jesus and he says, "Hey, since it's you, since you're Jesus, I know you're Jesus. This is not an if. He doesn't doubt that it's Jesus. Since you're Jesus, tell me to come to you." And he had previously done what Jesus had done in Matthew 10. He had cast out demons. He had healed the sick like Jesus had previously done. So Peter was getting it. He was saying, "Hey, if Jesus says I can do something, I can do it. If Jesus can do it, I can probably do it too if he says I can." So he asks him, "Hey, call me out to you. I want to come see you." And Jesus totally obliges. He says, "Come." So Peter listens. Now imagine being Peter getting out of the boat. So the way that these boats were designed, uh, it's not like there was a little door that he could just open right at sea level and walk out with no little bump. Uh, he would have had to, maybe climb on the edge of the boat. So, I mean, he could have just totally jumped out of the boat. He doesn't do that, I don't think. I think he stands on the side, maybe sits on the side, and probably has to hype himself up a little bit. He sees Jesus there. Jesus is calling to him. We don't get any indication that Peter takes, more time than is needed to make this happen. But I imagine a scene from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. It's a little bit of a dated movie, but I think that it might still work. So there's a scene where Indiana Jones, the lead character played by Harrison Ford, has to cross this vast chasm. It says you got to leap across it, but it's 30 feet long. You can't jump across that. And it's a test. Are you going to believe that there's ground here or not? And so he eventually gathers up his courage. He takes a step, and he gets caught after falling. you know, a foot or so. There's an invisible walkway that he's able to cross. So I think it's a similar thing. And Peter knows how to swim, but Peter also knows how big these waves are. He's been on the water his whole life. And so he's sitting on the edge of the boat, getting ready to go over the side of it. And he knows if he falls, it's not going to be the best thing. And Jesus said, come, so he's supposed to get out there. So he gets up the courage. He takes that first step, takes that little jump, and the water catches him. And he starts walking towards Jesus. We don't know how far away Jesus was from the boat, but he's going, but then he loses sight of Jesus and he starts to fall in the water. But even though it seems like Peter has failed, in his moment of weakness, he calls out to Jesus, and Jesus is there. Save me, Jesus. Jesus right there. Grabs him with his arm, pulls him up. And I think that the text doesn't say this. So this is another opportunity for us to think about what's going on here. Does Jesus sort of lean down, drag Peter through the water back to the boat, put him up on the side, everybody pulls him in? I don't think so. It's definitely possible. But we know that Peter was walking on the water when he was focused on Jesus. I think this is what happens is Jesus grabs him, pulls him up back out of the water, and they walk back to the boat together. Even though Jesus says to him, "Why did you doubt?" He's still with Peter, willing to walk with him back to the boat. So I think that it's worth paying attention that Jesus is saying, "You have little faith." You know, what's the way that Jesus is saying this? Again, we don't know. Is this a punitive thing? Is this a rebuke? You know, how you're such a person of little faith. How could you be this way, Peter? Is it a disappointed one? Or maybe it's a compassionate response, one of an expert speaking to a beginner. Oh, you poor thing. You have little faith. You got to keep your eyes on me. Come on, we'll try it again. And they do. They walk back. They get back to the boat together. But that's what fear is about. That's how fear works. When we're of little faith, we lose sight of the things that are important in the moment. But still, even as Peter loses that faith, he's a person of little faith. He gets out of the boat. He does this thing that nobody has ever done besides Jesus. And even when he fails, his little faith believes that Jesus will save him. I think that those are some major and important things. And then finally, they get back to the boat. The wind dies down, and the disciples worship him. So there's some revelation and response going there too. So Peter had his own series of revelation and response events, but the disciples, they see in the boat. They see all this happening. Peter and Jesus make it back to the boat, and they all worship Jesus. They're all starting to really understand that Jesus is truly the Son of God. So now we're going to spend some time just thinking about this text, what we want to bring to the group, what God might be saying to us. So I'm going to put the questions on the screen, but here are the 4 questions. Where is there conflict for you in this passage? Where is there clarity for you in this passage? Another way to think about that is where are things not going together? Where are things coming together for you? What might God be saying to you through this passage? And what might you want to do about it? So we'll take a few minutes and then we'll come together.